Prodigal Son by Michael Moynier. Along a field of sand and blood, pubescent children ranging in ages from 5 to 12 grapple viciously, seeking dominance over their opponents. Some bouts were fair, with similar sized combatants, while others were not, and painful applications of insurmountable odds were thrust upon the weaker of the two. Malnourished, bloody, and bruised, all these would be soldiers of the Imperium struggle to prove themselves as instructors look on with blank expressions, occasionally disciplining those too weak to continue with wooden cudgels. The Arak program, a long standing rite of passage for all formative citizens of Felderon, existed for thousands of years and had a hand in producing premier soldiers for the God Emperor's holy wars. Above this scene of brutal efficiency were two figures, each surveying this great work with a mix of disgust and irreverence. The notable of the two was an olive skinned, slender looking woman with sharp facial features and black, steely eyes, with long hair the color of midnight tied into a high ponytail. Her outfit was a simple black body glove with a white fur lined overcoat that concealed an arsenal of weaponry usually reserved for only the richest or most important of imperial society. This included a power saber and needle pistol of remarkable quality, and most notably, a red and gold rosette embossed with the holy symbol of the Inquisition hanging on a chain around her neck. This was Lord Inquisitor Su Yong, a minor arcana of the Arcanum Cabal. The other was Proctor General T. Manuel, a stout man of middling years with graying hair cut short and a square jawed face that looked like it had been reset multiple times in his life. He wore simple white robes with his rose gold chain of office hanging across his body, much like a sash of more ancient times. His ice blue eyes viewed the Lord Inquisitor with mild annoyance and trepidation in equal measure. So, do any of these aspirants catch your eye, Lord Inquisitor? He asked, his voice harsh and baroque. Su Yong tutted at his tone, but decided better of it. All too well, she had understood that tone and directness was characteristic of all Eldoranians. These people made for excellent soldiers, but often lacked social graces due to their harsh upbringing. Moving past this, she turned her attention to a figure sweep kicking a fellow aspirant. In a matter of seconds, the young male had put his opponent in an arm bar and swiftly put them on the ground. The logical next step expected of the aspirant would be applied force until his opponent was rendered unconscious, and yet he hesitated. It only lasted a couple of heartbeats before a nearby instructor moved over to apply his trade with a cudgel. At this point, the Proctor General took notice and gestured to the instructor to cease after 6 applied strikes to the poor boy's torso. I wish to know that boy's name, Proctor General, Suyong finally said, her voice softened like silk, and yet sharp as a snake. T. Manuel looked at the boy in disgust, seeing his moment of hesitation as a weakness to be beaten out. I, Lord Inquisitor, he finally spat out. He is the erstwhile son of two notable officers of the Astra Militarum. He died quite recently in a conflict outside the Antimorel sector. Couldn't tell you where, but it was noted and brought to my attention. Sue glanced at Manuel, observing his body language for hints of deception. Thankfully, the Proctor General appeared woefully ignorant. This was for the best. I care not whence the boy came, only in his character trait. Along with his aptitude scores, of course, she finally quips while turning away from the display below. Her steely eyes were on him now. Manuel couldn't help but let out an involuntary shiver. Make no mistake, Proctor Generality Manuel, she began with a sharp tone. Nothing escapes the God Emperor's holy order. This is to say, no prodigal child will be left untapped in his service. That child has all the makings of a useful tool to him on Terra. That boy will be put to the test, and if found wanting, our institutions shall dispose of him. Manuel straightened after the Lord Inquisitor's rebuke. There was a hint of defiance in his eye, Sue could tell, but it was stowed away with practiced discipline. Say what you will about Felderians, she thought, but they are dutiful creatures. Well, Lord Inquisitor, am I to take it that you wish for the boy to be transferred into inquisitorial custody for further training? Asked the Proctor General. At this question, Sue smirked before responding with a curt, No. She continued, This one has a trait that must be tested. You will transfer him to the Schola Progenium in Fel Prime. From there, he will be inducted into Arbutes training. Let us see if this trait of his can be retained after being party to the Lex Imperialis. Saying no more, she turned on her heel and left the Proctor General to his orders. Come hell or high water, the situation would resolve itself. The Lord Inquisitor suspected she knew the outcome regardless. Even so, it was now up to the boy. 736 M41 Orbital Shipyard at Hive World of Okadi 4. 22 years later. The sub-streets of Okadi 4 were ever winding, just as he remembered them. With practice ease, the concealed figure kept to the shadows and alleyways, being mindful of his surroundings while passing through, with nary a soul aware of his passing. This shitty world of industry had been his home for 16 years. Ever since he stepped foot on it, once attaining the rank as trooper within the Adeptus Arbites, Elijah Li knew that this world would be his end. There was just something about this place that sucked the vitality out of you. Indeed, only those with steel in their spine and a will like iron could survive this place the Emperor had forgotten so very long ago. Despite his misgivings, though, Elijah knew this place had a history. All worlds under the Imperial control had, to be sure, but Okadi 4 was especially noteworthy. Two times in its near 9,000 years of service to him on Terra, it had been attacked by forces of the worshippers of the machine god. First, by heretic forces fleeing the fall of the War Master in 062 and 31, and after a failed invasion of the Okadi system. Lastly, by the Adaptus Mechanicus in 768 M37, following a disagreement that plunged the Fel subsector into a brief rebellion over the finding of an STC. The fact that this was considered forbidden knowledge was of no concern to Elijah, though. His deduction of both events was simple analytics, as his role as the 31st Precinct's intelligencer found him perusing unusual documentation and speaking with weird people all over the Okadi system. He was careful not to have this knowledge traced back to him, but it wasn't foolproof by any means. Nothing was. As his thoughts lingered a bit longer on these useless musings, Elijah eventually made it to his destination. As he slipped out of the nearby alleyway, he was greeted with a sign showing a man in repose, as if being laid to rest in a coffin. A nearby street lumen revealed his form at last. 34 years of life in the service of the Imperium changed a man. Elijah Li was no different. The stresses of the Iraq program and Scala Progenium hardened his form into a tool of conflict. Athletic and built and tall, like most Feldrinians were, Elijah sported a pallid complexion with jaded blue eyes. His dark brown hair was kept short and started to show signs of graying on the sides. A hard-set jawline, clenched teeth kept surprisingly impeccable, given his profession. For this outing, Elijah wore simple naval blue breeches with black boots and a collared shirt of the same color. Over his shirt was a battle-worn carapace chest piece, but it was well concealed by a long coat from his long days as a detective in the 36th precinct. The high collar of the coat masked well most of his face, which helped him blend in with the scenery. Also did a fantastic job of hiding his knife, a bolt pistol, and power sword not typically used by his kind. Wasting no time, the Intelligencer approached the front door and began to tumble the lock with a combi tool designed for forced entry. After a few seconds, the tool did its job, and Elijah entered the establishment before carefully locking the door behind him with a deft gesture of his offhand. No one was there to greet him, but this was to be expected given the time of day and his need for secrecy. Looking around for signs of disturbance or sudden flight, Elijah clocked a scattered pile of papers with various scribbles near the main desk. Deciding to give them a once over, he headed to the location and began reading the contents out loud. Package was delivered per request. Handed off to contact following evening. Payment received at business concluded. At this, Elijah snickered before stowing the papers in his back pocket. He moved on to the next page. Contacted again for movement of stowed packages. Thought to ask about contents. This was decidedly a bad decision, as contact threatened my life in exquisite detail. Finished exchange and got out of the area. Swore I was being followed. By now, Elijah was pacing. A terrible habit that he performed while divulging information. Much like his need to regurgitate his thoughts out loud, this was a concession of process that helped memory retention, which was a useful skill to have as an intelligencer. Certainly kept him sharp, if not proved distracting to onlookers. As he stowed this piece away in the same back pocket, a creaking sound in the nearby hallway got his attention. With lightning-fast reflexes, he pulled out his bolt pistol and trained it down the hallway. Instinctively, Elijah kneeled on the ground, favoring the front desk as partial cover before producing a hand lumen that he began pointing towards the darkness. He was immediately met with the beady eyes of one Dr. Calvin Hartford. This weasel of a man truly earned his moniker as he hid his balding hairline and vermin-shaped facial features poorly in the light, his eyes reflective for the briefest of moments before his hands went up in natural defense. Who, who's there? He muttered under bated breath, hands still outstretching to guard against the sudden light source. Dr. Hartford, I take it you have good reason for hiding in your own house. Elijah's question was not followed by a de-escalation of his intent to fire with his very volatile sidearm. This notably unnerved the good doctor, which played into the Intelligencer's hand. By the throne, Lee, I thought you were my pursuer. You gave me such a fright, he finished, hands now lowering back to a normal resting position. Elijah couldn't contain his disdain as he snorted before slowly lowering his bolt pistol. No doubt you heard me reciting your words, so let's skip to the part where you spill your guts to me. Please note that I am both figurative and literal at this moment. Your answer spells out the outcome. With the light never leaving his face, Calvin inched closer to the open space of the front and merely smiled disarmingly as illumination followed him. Yes, about that, he began sheepishly. It seems your directions bore fruit. At your point, I integrated myself with the local criminal element. Couldn't get much out of them, except that they are moving large containers from off-planet into the city. He paused to clear his throat. What is inside, I couldn't ascertain. I was able to procure a logbook of the containers, though, but nothing makes sense to me. Here, it is in my safe behind the counter. Indicating the safe's location, Dr. Harford gestured to it questioningly before Elijah nodded his consent. Deciding not to test the Intelligencer's patience, the good doctor made for the safe and began to unlock it. He continued speaking in between the procedure. It's just as well you arrived when you did. There hasn't been a trooper down in these parts in some time. Talk as your precinct keeps a wide berth of these parts, as the gangs keep the tithe flowing. Bad for business if the tithe is compromised, eh? None escape the notice of the servants of the Lex Imperialis, Doctor, interjected Lee. You would do well to never forget that. While it is true we arbites keep to maintaining order so that the tithe may flow, it will not stop us from delivering justice to those that would defy his will. But of course, good sir, I meant no disobedience to your august institution. At this remark, Elijah gave the doctor a pointed stare that quickly cowed the man. By now the safe was unlocked and the manifest log was in Calvin's hands. His scrawny arms went straight to handing the logbook to Lee, but was swiftly torn asunder as stray ballistic fire entered the store from the outside. Falling back on decades of training, Lee vaulted over the front desk before landing firmly behind it. Cheap imitation mahogany splintered to pieces as the volley of fire persisted for a few heartbeats more, before stopping as the space was left smoking and scattered. On the floor spasmed the doctor as his torn limb bled out and his body went into shock. Cursing his poor awareness, Lee eyed the doctor to assess his condition before retrieving one of his two concussive grenades from the back of his utility belt. Before acting, he cleared his mind, as he was taught so long ago, and strained his hearing to try and pick up nearby footfall. Through the cloud of disorientation brought on by the sudden violent gunfire, eventually the familiar footfall of four assailants presented itself. Smiling despite it all, Elijah opened his eyes and released the safety clip from the grenade. He then tossed it overhead towards the approximate location of the gunman and sprang up to his feet shortly after the concussive force of the blast went off, firing 2 rounds from his bolt pistol and dispatching each mark. By the time the two remaining gunmen knew what was happening, the Intelligencer was on them with one man getting ran through with a knife, while the other braced his auto rifle and fired a burst of rounds that went wide of its mark. Closing the distance between each other, Elijah lifted his bulky sidearm and pistol whipped the final assailant, watching as the man's face cracked from the impact and reeled back violently. Delirious from the assault, the gunman was all but helpless as a follow-up kick to the sternum laid him out on the floor. Behind gritted teeth, Elijah sprung atop the gunman and applied his manacles to him with practiced ease. With hands behind his back and the world spinning, the assailant was lifted to his feet and slammed into the splintered desk for added control and for Elijah's own temper. Start talking, scum, spoke Lee as he applied a pressure point to the gunman's neck. If he was in delirious pain before, the pressure point shocked the man straight back into reality with the kind of clarity only pain could procure. Fell you filthy off-worlder, the gunman yelled in defiance. Elijah answered with applied pressure, making the man howl in pain before replying. Wrong answer. Let me be more direct. Who sent you? He asked. Come now, off-word. You know that it's not how it works. You'll die if I tell you. You'll die if I don't. Either way, a bolt is in the immediate future. Elijah growled at this and applied yet more pressure, eliciting a howl from the man, usually heard from feral animals. I can do this all night, but you don't have much of a threshold left. It wouldn't matter anyhow, as you've neglected the third option in your assessment. Oh, and what would that be further? The gunman quipped sarcastically. Elijah smiled a wolfish grin and leaned into the man's ear before whispering. The one where I take you into the precinct and let the castigator have his way with you. Now, I assure you that is not an outcome you want. Leaving the threat sinking in for a moment, Elijah leaned back to his standing position and waited for the inevitable plea bargain scum like this usually fell back on. Eventually, a string of curses came out, the man, but he relented and turned his blurry eyes to the Intelligencer. Okay, off-word there. You in? I'll tell you what I know, but I will need assurances. I want off the world, away from what is coming to me. Can you secure me that? Elijah involuntarily spat on the floor, utterly sickened by the man's cowardice before grabbing him by the scruff of his neck and lifting him up so they were face to face. We all want an out. Coward. The only difference between your lot and mine is the knowledge that only in death does your duty end. You lost yourself in this madness. Let it conquer you. Fear has you and has taken hold of your sacred duty, muddled your purpose. You want an out? Very well. I will give you an out. Give me a name, and you shall have your out. The gunman realized he was out of options. You could see it in his eyes. He was under no delusions of grandeur. He knew what came next, and yet he smiled. Finally, he spoke, his voice shaking in as much defiance as he could muster. Fear ain't got shit on me next, off further. Regardless, the die is cast, and I have nothing left to lose. Tell me, does the name Barlinda Corty ring any bells? Elijah just stared at the gunman. This was not possible. Barlinda Corty was a prominent socialite. Absolutely clean, too. He made sure of it, and he was rarely wrong on such matters. Grok shit, Elijah muttered. Pressure was reapplied and the man held anew. Yet, he persisted by gritting his teeth and looking at the arbitres pleadingly. I am telling you the truth. I swear by the throne. Barlinda Corty is the one who moves the containers. She uses my gang as transporters, but we don't know what they are transporting. All I know is it is heavy and requires special equipment to move, for fear of it going boom. Now please, I told you all I know. I want my out orbites. Elijah was too consumed in his inner musings to give the man much thought beyond taking a step back and training his bolt pistol on him. Before an objection could be uttered by him, his face was blasted off as the mass reactor round of the bolt exploded on impact. The mess of the man caked the nearby floor with brain matter, but Elijah could care less as he gathered up the discarded logbook from the doctor's side. His blank stare was all he needed to know that he died of shock. Despite his nature, it was a true pity to lose such a useful informant. In this Elijah was saddened. Such assets were hard to come by in his line of work. Deciding to make sure Calvin got a proper burial when this was all done, Elijah brushed off dust and body matter off the logbook before beginning to read it. Within a few minutes of reading, he found what he was looking for. House Cordy was moving a huge arsenal of weapons, ammunition, and what was likely heavy ordnance into position for some sort of assault. If Elijah's calculations were correct, everything was just about in place for something big to transpire. What or where were two answers he didn't have an answer for, but given the implications, he suspected it was nothing short of an open conflict against those in control of the whole Acadie system. Deciding to do something about it, Elijah stowed the logbook in his coat pocket and rushed back to the upper city precinct. With luck, he would stop this all before it had a chance to begin. Another 2 hours came and went before Elijah returned to the precinct. At this point, the first watch was beginning to file in, even as he made his way to Judge Erasmus Giddish's office. To get the kill order on Barlinda Corty, he needed to prove that she was suspected in disrupting the imperial tithe by inciting insurrection. It was a stretch, given what evidence he had gathered up at this point, but Elijah couldn't shake the feeling he stumbled upon something big and dangerous to the whole system of Acadie. Upon entering the judge's office, he was greeted with very Spartan quarters. Apart from a chair and a desk made of metal, there was nothing that brought character to this drab room. Not that Elijah had an eye for art or possessed much of an aesthetic himself, but one would think a lifetime of service to the Arbites would warrant some character to a living space. Deciding to refocus his mind, Elijah looked to the judge and gave him the sign of the Aquila. Judge Erasmus eyed Elijah with a predatory glance before returning the salute. He then gestured for the younger man to stand before his desk. Ever the professional, Elijah did as he was ordered and took an eased stance in front of the desk while presenting the logbook and assorted papers gathered from Calvin's place. Judge Erasmus, Elijah began, his tone deferential. After receiving a curious report from one of my contacts in the lower city, I decided it was prudent to contact him directly. This proved serendipitous as he revealed his colleagues within the transport gangs were moving heavy containers into the city. My contact was able to procure a logbook on site during his last exchange with the gang representative. Though, I'm sad to say I lack collaboration due to his death by a kill squad sent by the gang. I was able to dispatch them in a firefight and interrogate the last man standing before delivering him the Emperor's justice. He revealed the name of the one that hired this gang to move the containers into the city. One Barlinda Corty, of House Corty. I will note that this is not the first time our office has connected House Corty to Lex violation, nor is this a petty infraction. Elijah paused for his words to sit in the air for divulsion before resuming. I propose that we conduct a raid of House Corty's estate. It is clear they are moving munitions and other heavier arsenal, likely for some manner of insurrection or squabble that would upset the tithe. All my contacts have alluded to some feud brewing up in the upper city for some time now. If this is a vie for power, it risks the tithe beyond acceptable parameters. Erasmus, quiet up to this point, was busy perusing the logbook as Elisha made his case. After many minutes of silence, the judge put down the logbook and looked at the intelligencer with cold, calculating coolness. Indeed, Judge Erasmus Gedish was a hard man, with a firm jaw and pronounced cheekbones that made his face appear wide and angular. He was not a pretty man, nor did he care to project himself thusly. His frame was stocky, and his lips curled in a permanent scowl of disdain. When he spoke, his voice cracked and strained over decades of yelling out the Lex Imperialis to those who would defy his will. The evidence you've gathered is light at best, Intelligencer Li. There is no reason to suspect this is anything other than one house attempting to usurp dominance over the other. Furthermore, House Corty is on the rise and has many members within the planetary governor's court positioned to establish immediate compliance with imperial law, and therefore the type would resume upon its usurpation. To put it simply, I find your evidence lacking and will not allow the raid. Elijah was about to argue with the judge, but swiftly surmised that would be an exercise in both insubordination and futility. Once Erasmus decided on a course of action, it was always final. He was bullheaded and stubborn that way, and such traits has cost the precinct dearly numerous times in the past. Elijah excused himself from the judge's presence and left the office feeling defeated. For a time, he stalked the hallways of the precinct, attempting to come up with a workaround Erasmus's decision. All options were disastrous and foolhardy. More than several of them would certainly end in his execution. Such was the Lex Imperialis that it did not afford lenience in prosecution of those that disobey orders from their superiors. Elijah wouldn't be cowed by such threats to life and career, though. He kept getting this sinking feeling in his gut that told him something else was going on. It was pure instinct, with no evidence pointing to anything other than what Judge Erasmus had stated. On some level, Lee knew the judge was right, yet the feeling remained. After a few moments more of soul searching, Lee decided he couldn't let this lie. So, he went to the one person he knew he could count on. Someone who, for better or worse, would walk into the warp with him if he asked. Elijah Lee emerged a few minutes later into the guard mount room, which served as the staging point for the incoming and outgoing watches of the RBT squads in this section of the city. In total, 100 troopers stood at attention as 10 sergeants and 1 captain inspected them. Most maintained orderly attention as Elijah approached them, though the nearest sergeant and captain both faced and saluted him upon arrival. Lee afforded them the sign of the Aquila before getting to the business of the day. I have gathered intelligence connecting a planetary noble to a transport rocket and require immediate assistance for a shakedown, he said while folding his hands behind his back. The captain, an old friend to Lee from his days as a trooper named Edith Geristor, looked at him quizzically before saying, "Good morning to you too, Intelligencer Lee," Edith said playfully. "Has your time in the offices scoured you of your manners as well as your understanding of the chain of command? You know full well that I go nowhere without orders from Judge Erasmus. Where is he, or failing his presence, his orders?" Elijah gave her a knowing look as response. Edith scoffed at such cheek in retort before gesturing for the sergeant to leave to finish the inspection of the troops. When he was far enough away as to not eavesdrop, she turned back to Elijah and removed her helmet to reveal chestnut-colored skin with warm brown eyes. Her brown hair, kept short, was slicked back and blended well into her heart-shaped face as she lingered on the Intelligencer for a spell. Finally, she spoke to him in a softer tone, revealing her true nature away from the troopers. It's been some time since you called, Elijah. Girl could start to think they were passed over for someone else. Normally, Elijah Li was the sort of man that concealed his emotions behind a mask of indifference and aloofness, anything to keep others guessing what he thought or felt. With Edith, it was different. He couldn't help but soften as he looked into her eyes. I'm sorry, Edith. Nothing I say will make much of a difference, and time is not on our side. I need your help. If we don't act now, it is very probable we will have let an insurrection take place that will compromise the Emperor's peace. Edith seemed unconvinced and placed her free hand on her hip. A tell Elijah understood as confrontational, but amenable to Edith's case. He pressed on. Judge Erasmus doesn't find my evidence compelling enough to warrant a raid on House Cordy, but you and I both know he is likely in their pocket. For 4 years now, that house has been on the rise and has been funneling funds into prominent figures within the planetary hierarchy. Erasmus's inaction would make sense. He is buying them time. Suppose this is true. What do you expect will happen once we violate his orders and strike House Cordy anyway? She asked, her face incredulous. Likely we would be thrown in detention and either executed or sent to a penal colony, Elijah stated matter-of-factly. When as such dangers concerned you insofar as duty was concerned, he countered with a flourish of his hand. A few seconds passed before a smile etched onto Edith's face. It irritated her to no end on how well Elijah knew her. There was also apprehension at the fact that she knew he was manipulating her sense of duty to achieve his objectives. Well, damned if you do and damned if you don't, she thought as she turned to the nearest sergeant and ordered for a full squad to form up for orders. They obeyed with practiced precision and awaited her command. Squad Gamma, she stated with an uplifting voice. Make ready your assault gear. We raid House Cordy in 5 minutes. To expedite their travel and avoid unwanted attention, Elijah had Edith requisition a repressor. The modified Rhino was equipped with non-lethal weaponry and a loud-hailer system more than capable of reaching the ears of anyone near and far. In 15 minutes they were embarked and rolling out the precinct with none the wiser. House Cordy's estate would take 30 minutes to arrive at, and it was very likely within the hour Judge Erasmus would know his squad had been assigned elsewhere. That was only 30 minutes, if that, for their strike team to get in and conduct a successful raid. They all had been made aware of what they were riding into. For their part, the troopers were obedient and relished the chance to provide support in shaking down evidence of House Cordy's would-be insurrection. For his part, Elijah drug out his old enforcer carapace and put it on for added protection. The only thing that set him apart from the other line troopers was purity seals on his right shoulder pad and chest piece, and a gold shoulder pad with the symbol of the Adeptus Abrites engraved in, and a Noctis variant Relevantum mask feeding him tactical data and Auspex readings. He had kept his weapons from before in his kit, but added his trusty Arbite shotgun for added versatility. He received more than a few playful barbs about his kit from Captain Geristor. He had a sneaking suspicion he was bringing these good people into a firefight, but chose to keep silent about his misgivings and allowed the levity to carry. When the last few minutes approached, Edith and Elijah exchanged a look. Too many years working alongside each other bred a type of understanding that went past simple well-wishing words. They both knew how they felt, not just about the current situation, but about their feelings for each other. Elijah had never been great with romances. He blamed it partly on his upbringing on Felderon. That place bred warriors, not lovers. It didn't help that culturally they assigned breeding partners. was not out of love when one engaged in marriage on Felderon. Elijah knew this was an excuse, though. The truth of the matter is, he was afraid of love, of being so vulnerable as to be loved and cared for by another. He didn't relish losing that independence or control over his own life, such as that was worth in this dark millennium. Shaking his head, Lee was about to say something to Edith before the driver notified them. They had arrived at the estate. Putting back on that mask of duty and singular focus, Elijah nodded to the captain and watched as she barked orders to disembark. One by one, the troopers exited the repressor, riot shields and shock malls at the ready in some hands, and RBT's shotguns in others. In short order, they formed a perimeter outside the high gates of House Cordy. The morning mist that usually clung to the roadways and hidden paths was still present, adding to an eerie feeling in the air as Elijah walked to the gate intercom and pressed its activation rune with one gauntleted finger. A red light illuminated the rune upon depression, and after a second of static, a voice came out the Vox speaker. No appointments exist at such an early hour for today. State your business or face the wrath of Horse Cordy's personal guard. Elijah looked at Edith quizzically before turning back to the Vox, his voice raising to a volume he usually reserved for sentencing or proclamations. This is Intelligencer Ilijah Li of the 31st Precinct of the Adeptus Arbites. You are hereby ordered to open your gates and await judgment. Failure to comply is in direct violation of the Lex Imperialis and will result in the termination of all personnel on this premise and further prosecution towards all members and affiliates to House Cordy. You have 10 seconds to comply or seal your fate. Upon finishing, Elijah looked back to Edith and shrugged. Not his best dictation, but it might very well get them in the door. That's all they needed. The rest would be smooth sailing. The silence that followed was a surprise, to be sure, but not one uncommon when dealing with nobility. That lot always moved at their own speed, mainly because they knew they could get away with it, save for choice operatives of his will. Just when those 10 seconds were about up, and Elijah was afraid he would have to become violent, the gates opened wide, and before them a big mansion lay 30 meters ahead. No servants or guards awaited them in the mist, which wasn't odd this early in the morning. But just to hedge his bets, Elijah activated his auspex and scanned the immediate vicinity for any signs of life or other heat signatures. He picked up nothing unusual, save a residual grainy image further inside the mansion, but that was to be expected. Without further hesitation, he gestured to the captain that all was well. Giving the order to move up, the captain led the squad of 10 troopers and a sergeant through the misty pathway. After passing 15 meters in, they heard the screeching noise of the gate close behind them and the whistling sound of something coming at them. Before most could react, an explosive round slammed into the suppressor and blew a hole through the side plating. 4 troopers within the blast radius were killed instantly, their smoking remains collapsing to the ground as follow-up small arms fire began raining down the remaining RBTs. Elijah managed to his feet quick enough following the blast and rushed to Edith's side and hooked his free arm underneath hers before dragging her to a nearby shrubbery. The remaining troopers and sergeant also managed to find cover and began returning fire towards the assailants in the mist. Now in cover, Elijah looked to see if the captain had sustained any injuries, but thankfully all she was experiencing at this time was shock from the blast. Her helmet would set her right soon enough, but until then he needed to protect her from anyone that sought to finish the job the explosive round started. Cursing his luck and lack of functioning equipment, Elijah equipped his shotgun and fired 3 consecutive shots in the direction he thought enemies resided. The bloody sound of body parts violently ripping off was a good start, and he kept up the covering fire until he needed to reload his firearm. Others around him seemed to be acquitting themselves well against the foe, and blood sprays could be seen briefly in the mist. It was evident that the attacker was undisciplined too, as erratic automatic fire was followed by long periods of reloading with no covering fire to follow. This allowed the Arbites to fire and reposition frequently, letting them close the gap on the enemy. This was further aided by the riot shields as their heavy plates proved adequate cover against anything the enemy could muster against them. By the time the squad began closing the distance, the captain returned to her senses and was helped up by Elijah as he provided covering fire with his shotgun so she could move up with the troopers. When she was safely in position further up, he used her returning fire support to rendezvous with the others. In short, controlled order, they all approached the front door to the mansion while dispatching the remaining enemy combatants. Before proceeding further into the inner complex, Elijah stopped to observe the nearest enemy corpse. Something about what he was wearing hurt his eyes, even under the protective lens of his visor. Ever the curious fool, the Intelligencer kicked the corpse onto its back and revealed a horrid brass mask on his face curled into a laughing maniac. All over his clothes were smeared blood and skulls hanging on his belt from butcher hooks. The skulls seemed to have carved runes all over them, forcing Elijah to recoil in disgust as after images flashed repeatedly in his mind. Thankfully, he was made of sterner stuff and was able to hold back his vomit and push the images away. Other troopers were not so fortunate and began to cackle maniacally before turning their guns on their companions. Luckily, both the captain and Elijah had encountered such pervasive markings before and dispatched the three before they could turn on them. Looking to the remaining Arbites, Elijah made the sign of the Aquila before saying, "Steel yourselves, loyal servants of the throne. We now face the archenemy, and they will be afforded no quarter. Sergeant, Fox back to precinct command and inform them we've encountered heretical forces at the Cordy estate." Acknowledging his orders, the sergeant began transmitting the message on the Vox while Edith pulled Elijah aside. When they were alone, she punched him in the arm, her voice whispering as to avoid detection. "You felling arsehole. You marched my men straight into a heretical conspiracy. Did you know?" Elijah didn't respond to the punch. He neither hurt nor would help matters by responding in kind. Instead, he gave her a serious look. "No," he said finally. When she refused to relent, he sighed and hung back his head to the nearest wall of the mansion in defeat. "All right. I suspected something was off, but my gut feeling on the matter wasn't enough to deter me from doing my duty." "Oh, sod your duty, Elijah," she retorted. "You knew and you took the risk, like you always do. I should have known you were up to your usual tricks." Elijah pushed off from the wall and locked eyes with the captain. "That's not fair, Edith," he said through clenched teeth. She had pushed one of his buttons and damn well knew it. He went on. "You never could do what it took to get the job done. Repeatedly you hesitate, leaving me to pull you out of the fire. This is why you have stagnated in your position for 4 years. This is why 7 of our men are dead." Edith had always been quick. It was likely due to her size and disarming features. This is how she slipped past Elijah's defenses and hit him square in the jaw, making the Intelligencer stumble back a few steps before righting himself. Elijah was certain she cracked his jawbone as he stood straight in defiance to her aggression. Another strike did not follow the first, and instead she pointed a finger at him and dug it into his chest. "No," she growled. "Their deaths are on you. I am only culpable insofar as I allowed your words and our past to sway me. Be assured, Intelligencer Li, that will not happen again." Right before Elijah could retort, the sergeant looked to them with an update. "Captain," he stated with trepidation, "I've tried several times now to get a message across, and I keep getting static. Something is jamming the Vox. I've blown 2 cylinders already trying to boost the signal, but to no effect. We are alone out here." "Right. Well, sod it then," she replied. "Rally on me and prepare to withdraw. Hopefully we can get out of range of whatever is jamming us and get a signal out. Protocol is clear. Let's go." "Wait," Elijah almost shouted. He raised his hand in peace towards Edith, hoping to speak. She merely shook her head and stared daggers at him. He pressed on anyway. "If we retreat now, we will be pursued and eventually gunned down. Our only path to victory is pressing forward." "That's felling suicide, Elijah," she countered. "Not if we move fast and hit them hard. There is something in there that they don't want us to see. Otherwise, they would have played dumb and misdirected us elsewhere in the estate. If we don't act now, whatever they're hiding might get away. At this point, it is do or die, Captain. Please, I'm begging you. Your misgivings of me compromise our chance at ending this here and now. Another few moments of silence passed between the two. Eventually, she shook her head and ordered the door be blown in. Nodding his thanks to her, Edith didn't even acknowledge and trained her shotgun down range as the door detonated inward from a placed blast charge. As a team, the remaining 6 members of the strike force poured into the mansion, laying down fire upon any enemies left out in the open. The blast proved a useful distraction as it caught many defenders in the radius and left the others dazed and confused. With the uniform ease of trained soldiers, the Arbites cut down many heretics before clearing the entryway. Wasting no time, the squad reformed and started up the grand stair right outside the foyer. In twos, the group covered each other, moving up in patterns they've executed hundreds of times before. Occasionally, a random heretic would pop out of some form of cover to try and ambush the group, but was met with controlled fire that eliminated them on the spot. Door by door, the squad went, terminating several heretics along the way before arriving at the door adorned unlike any other. It was carved from some unknown species of wood and bore a golden doorknob. The decor was lost on the RPTs, however, and they simply applied another blast charge center mass and waited in cover for the inevitable detonation. Before it could, though, an arc of lightning broke through and hit them all in a chain of destruction. On the lesser quality armor, the arc of lightning simply disintegrated everything it touched, eating through straight to the bone. One by one, the troopers fell into a pile of ash and smoky remains. The sergeant collapsed onto his knees, his eyes melting from their sockets as he howled in pain before expiring in a slumped position. Only Edith and Elijah were largely unscathed. Instinctively, the Intelligencer had transposed his frame at the last second in front of the captain and shielded her from the lightning with an outstretched hand. Miraculously, a blue field of energy projected from Elijah's hand. Unsure of what to make of it, he gritted his teeth and strained to keep it up just long enough before the weird power ceased. Upon realizing this newfound ability, Elijah fell to his knees exhausted and bleeding out of his nose and ears. In the interior of the room strode a middle-aged woman with blonde hair wearing an emerald dress cut at the leg. She bore a staff in one hand that was made from some ash-colored wood and reeked of foul energy. Demure and vicious in equal measure, the woman simply tutted before slamming the head of her staff into Elijah, forcing him to keel over, clutching his stomach. Edith had recovered from the lightning strike quickly enough and pumped 2 rounds into the witch, but was shocked to see both rounds disintegrate in midair as if flickering purple energy lashed across the eyes of the woman in the emerald gown. Apparently, this action displeased the lady greatly, and she responded by flicking her fingers at the captain and throwing her down the hallway like a rag doll. Alone, at last, the woman cupped Elijah's chin in her free hand and lifted it up to inspect he who resisted her powers. After a fierce manhandling, something that hurt greatly due to the injury to his jawbone from before, she appeared satisfied and pushed him down to the floor with more strength than what would have been possible given her size. "You stupid fool," she hissed with an unnatural allure. "I don't know how you stumbled upon our grand plan, but thanks to your foolhardy bravado, we will be able to write off your deaths as unwarranted aggression." A swift kick to the ribs followed her words, and then a few more fractured bones for good measure. Coughing up blood, Elijah was all but powerless to fight back, as he felt his mind aching from whatever he produced before to protect Edith. Not to mention, he started to hear aggressive whispering in his ear that would not relent. Seemingly unfazed by his struggles, the woman in emerald continued. Her words almost seeped into Elijah's mind like some siren call. "In the end, you are powerless against my psychic might. Know that in your final moments, I, Barlinda of House Cordy, send your soul to the dark gods to wither in darkness for all eternity." In pure defiance, Elijah managed to crawl onto his hands and knees before forcing his body up to enough of a position to look Barlinda with some disgust. He accentuated this point by spitting blood upon her shoes before smiling a bloody smile. Only in death does my duty end, witch. I go now to my God and my ancestors with no regrets. Eat shit and die, traitor. Plucky, to the very end, she interjected while attempting to run a drawn dagger retrieved from a thigh scabbard into his chest. Just before the blade plunged into his heart, however, a needle pierced her hand, forcing the dagger to clatter to the ground and Barlinda to stagger back as some foreign agent began coursing through her veins, causing seizing. Across the hallway stood a woman wearing a black body glove, holding a needle pistol in one hand and an ornate power saber in the other. Her midnight hair was long and drawn into a ponytail, and her olive skin almost seemed to shine from obvious sweat building up as four stormtroopers in black carapace rushed forward and wasted no time laying down one shot after the other towards the witch. It was almost comical how many last rounds were put into the noble before she fell to the ground, dead and spasming on the floor as Elijah stared dumbfounded at the newcomers. After several other stormtroopers in black carapace showed up to continue purging the residence, the olive-skinned woman walked over to the injured Intelligencer and looked down at him with a curious expression on her face. Elijah, despite his injuries, was very good at picking up on small details. One that stood out plain as sin was an inquisitorial rosette dangling from a necklace around the neck of the lady that just saved his life. To say he was concerned was an understatement. I presume you know what I am, eh, Arbites? She said with a mocking tone. You may know me as Suyong, Lady Inquisitor in service to His Holy Inquisition. It would seem you stumbled upon my investigation to root out the cold thorns in the system. Tell me, how did you beat me to the punch? This was all absurd. How could he explain it was all just dumb luck, without getting shot? Come to think about it, how was he not going to get shot? Elijah was not a dumb man, despite recent events, and knew he was not long for this world. This conversation was spurred on by idle curiosity. Nothing more. He did not like to play games, despite it all. Sheer dumb luck, he finally muttered before turning to try and find Edith. She followed up by a way too close look in the eyes of the man as she squatted down to reach Elijah at eye level. He could tell she was an odd one, but said nothing for fear of her reprisal. It didn't seem to matter one bit as Sue smiled and gave him a knowing look. You would do well to guard your thoughts, young man. Try running equations in your head. That works for me anyhow. Chuckling at the absurdity of it all, Elijah attempted to get to his feet, but soon learned that was a mistake as he clutched his side in horrible pain. The Lady Inquisitor merely observed his behavior and smiled sheepishly before locking him with a rather intense stare. You are more than what you let on, I think, and I'm rarely wrong about such things. So here's your options. We can round up you and your lady friend and put a bullet in your heads. She produced one finger in her hand. You can be thrown to the wolves and let the system sort you out. A second finger appeared in her hand. Or we shoot the girl and you come with me to serve as my acolyte. The third and final finger appeared along with a crooked smile. Elijah hated all of this. He knew damn well that not one of these choices were choices at all. He almost certainly knew of the three, the only one that might be the best outcome for Edith and himself would be to get released into the system. Edith would be given to the nearest penal world. There was no escaping that fate. She had willingly violated a direct order from a judge and got a whole squad killed in her actions. Execution would be a waste, and the life of a penal legionnaire was just how it would go down for her. He, however, was destined for the black ships. While his knowledge of psychers was limited, he knew somehow that he had awakened during that fight. Nothing else could explain what he accomplished back then. Regardless, This was taking away from the matter at hand, which was an outcome that spared Edith a fate that ended in imminent death. Looking up at Sue, Elijah sighed in defeat as he stated, Option 2. I will not trade my life for that of a loyal servant to the Imperium. She sacrificed too much for my vainglorious actions. Let her serve the throne elsewhere. Su Yung was not surprised at his answer. In fact, made her smile even more as she hoped he would pick it. Without warning, she plopped down into a sitting position and sighed a sigh of relief as she looked over at the Arbites captain, getting tended to by some black-clad medicae. You know, Elisha, she said suddenly with more than a bit of weight in her voice, wasn't sure about you for the longest time. After all, 22 years is a long time to hold out on an aspirant like yourself. What really sold me on you back then was your rare quality to show mercy to your combatant, despite the inevitable punishment you would receive because of your unwillingness to conform to your society's expectations. I mean, really, how often do you suppose a child of your upbringing displays a trait like mercy? Just doesn't happen. You are cold out of the herd quicker than you could spit. That is the long and short of it. What I'm driving at, though, is you are unique but untested in your convictions. I needed to see how life would treat you, see if you would bend or break under the pressure of this uncaring galaxy. You know, you didn't disappoint me. You displayed nobility just now, in an attempt to spare your lady love an unfair death at the hands of fate. I think you know that what will happen to you too, regardless of all the facts as they are. Despite this knowledge, you stayed the course and showed me that the little boy in the Iraq program never broke from his conviction to do what is right, even if it is hard. Su Young suddenly hopped up to her feet and offered her hand to Elijah. The smile never left her face as she continued. You are perfect for my warband and would be an invaluable asset to the Inquisition. What say you to joining me of your own free will? And maybe bring the captain along too. After all, I could always use another able-bodied soldier in this eternal crusade. So, what say you, Elijah Lee? For a moment, Elijah just remained still, contemplating his options and the fact that he was groomed his entire life for this moment was also humbling and irritating in equal measure. However, he knew it was the best he was going to get for Edith, which, despite it all, was all he cared about at this time. With a heartfelt hand, he grabbed Su Yong's and rose to greet his new life with more than a little concern. So, he said with a half smile etching his face, what comes next? Su Yong returned the smile and clapped Elijah on the back, eliciting a wince from the poor boy before asking, Ever heard of a judge by the name of Erasmus Gadish? Elijah just laughed and clutched his side as the pain returned with thunderous applause. He was going to like working with Su Young. He just had a good feeling about it. This has been an unofficial fan fiction short story set in the Warhammer 40,000 universe. If you like what you heard, please consider supporting Games Workshop and all affiliates. As always, thank you for listening and see you all in the next one.